Welcome to Inside the Moms Club, where being a mom is the coolest place to be. Here in the Moms Club, we believe that what embarrasses you now will make a great story later. And let's face it, if you don't laugh sometimes, you're going to cry. Join us in having a good laugh together. I'm Monica Samuels. You are now a member of Inside the Moms Club, your private destination for all things mom. Hi, moms. Welcome to Inside the Moms Club. I'm Monica Samuels, and I'm here today with my co-host, Julie Orchid. Hello, Julie.
AKA travel partner.
Yes, we've been travel buddies. The last week, we were on the scene. We were your investigative reporters inside Florida spring break, and it almost broke us. That's all I can say. It was like nothing I ever thought I would see, honestly. It was swarming with kids, and they were all misbehaving, and it was just crazy. And their parents were
like you
crazier,
said, something was missing.
Story.
Something was missing.
Yeah.
Blech.
I mean, like thousands of kids roaming around. During the day, they were just kind of roaming around together in packs.
Yeah.
But at night, they would vandalize things. Let's see, there was a drag race on a dirt road that has a bunch of potholes and things. It's like totally unsafe. They had a little accident. It could have been a lot worse because people normally walk on that road. So it was good. There was nobody walking or riding their bike in the dark. One day I was driving home from dinner, and Julie and her daughter, and it was hard to drive with kids just like wandering around on their phones and like stumbling around. And there was a bunch of kids in front of me, and my husband reached over and honked the horn at them, which did not go over well.
It did not.
I told him, you do not honk the horn
in a small little
from
beach
the
town.
Passenger seat. Because you know what? If one of them has like some designs, like if you want to get in a road rage or a bad situation, who do they think honked the horn?
Yeah, Monica's the driver.
Yeah, like don't you own it? No, I'm not going to. But then they slept. They started hitting the back of our car. So that was not what he was expecting. You know, he thought he'd get him to move out of the way. It was just...
Well, for me, I had come take the teenagers down from one beach to the other. And for me, it was like there was this pack that was like loose chickens, like over the road and out of the road. And it was like late. It was like 10:30 at night. And this is a major highway. So I think I was just a little bit surprised.
Well,
they've been cooped up a little bit, right?
It's like, okay, so COVID, it's like everybody in America, of course, has been shot out of a cannon, and now they're all going to go do whatever. And so it was their parents included. I did have a conversation with, so after a night of bikes and all kinds of junk all over the driveway at the house where we were staying, I had a discussion with two moms who had the big party next door. Oh, that was the start. So they're very young kids.
Yes.
And Julie tells me from the kitchen window, she can see into the next house, all these young kids drinking. So the kids are all drinking. There's no adults anywhere in sight.
Right.
The next morning, there's bikes and all kinds of stuff everywhere.
Right, which is not the surprising part, the teenagers. But
then so these angry moms come over, all defensive, because I complained because, hey, could you get the bikes out of, so we don't run over them or run over a child? And they were just, like, they're very defensive. And I thought...
I think they were stressed that
what are you teaching? You
have these kids in this house and that,
that they rented so that these kids could go crazy. And then the next night, the kids got smart, so all the shades were pulled. So we could no longer spy on them. So that happened. But then we decided, we're going to take charge. And on our Instagram page, at Inside the Moms Club. You need to find us on Instagram. We recorded from the scene. We were reporting and hoping to give some moms some helpful hints about how to handle spring break. Because spring break just started this last week, and it's going to keep going for weeks as more and more of you moms and parents go out there. And
I think we saw more than one post on social media. Is it over yet?
Yeah, from all the neighbors. But we did go and visit the sheriff. We interviewed a couple of sheriff's deputies who refused to be videotaped on camera, but they were not complimentary of the situation. And then they have the big, look, on a vacation, if the local police have to bring out their roving jailhouse for you all to have fun, that is not a good vacation. I mean, that's not a good sign. And if your kids end up in there, that's even worse.
But the best part about these kids is that they would just roam around and say, "Where are we going now? Now where are we going?"
Yeah.
They just didn't have anywhere to,
let's just
plant
say
themselves.
It was a mess.
It was so
but
interesting.
You know what? What we're lucky about today? We have a great guest who's going to help us navigate how to handle our kids.
Right.
And it's not post-pandemic. I mean, we're still, COVID isn't over entirely, but we're in a different phase of everything. So how do we handle that so that our children don't end up with arrest records or anything like what's the best way to do this? So we are thrilled today to have as our guest Limor Weinstein, who is a licensed psychotherapist in New York City. She is the founder and executive director of Bespoke Wellness Partners. Limor is from Israel originally. She lived in a kibbutz when she was younger. And she was a commander in the Israeli military, which would
we needed
kind
her.
of experience.
We needed you on
we
spring
wish
break.
she'd been with us last week. That would have made a big difference. And she's the mother of 3 teenagers, so she totally, I'm sure, understands. Besides the work that she does with her clients' children, she has her own children. She gets it all. Limor, I believe, has all the answers. But for all the many questions that we have, welcome Limor to the Moms Club.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you. So, COVID, all the kids have been cooped up. We've had conversations on some of our other shows about what kids have been facing through the pandemic. I mean, in many cases, they've been isolated. They weren't with other, they weren't at school. They were on Zoom. Social media became more important. So I guess the first thing I would ask is, how do you help navigate your children into this new environment where they're now again socializing now with their other kids? What we found last week, or what we saw, is a lot of permissive behaviors that I'm not sure would have happened. But not that everyone was perfect, because we certainly weren't. But it wouldn't have probably happened if a lot of people didn't feel like it's time for our kids to have a good time, which in this case looked a little destructive. What are some of the tips you would offer parents to help their kids get back into normal life, or what has always been considered normal life, in a healthy way?
Right. And I think you're bringing a good point with a lot of parents allowing kids to do more than they would have done otherwise. And which is why the first and maybe most challenging tip for the parents is to focus on themselves. It's looking in the mirror and asking themselves, what is it like for us? Like, how do we feel, in general? And then when our teen or when our child is interacting with us, how do we feel? What do we think about? And are we reacting? And, just to be more thoughtful about your own response or reaction.
Yes.
I think that's like the most important tip, because as I'm sure you know, for most parents, out of, goodwill and, they want to fix things, they want to repair things, they just want to tell the kids what to do, right? But sometimes it's not the right thing to do. And I think that's the mistake that a lot of people are doing, or they're being judgmental, or they're criticizing the child. Why are you doing this? Why are you on social media? And just the kid is just kind of being pushed away when the parent is, coming across as that criticizing, judging, know-it-all type of a parent.
Right. Yeah. I think I have one point that I'd like to ask about. So I think that I've been reading a lot about kids and listening about happiness and depression. And I think that it has been known that there's been more depression and anxiety. I'm going to say 20-year-olds. Obviously, some of these kids went to college in a pandemic. So I think that a lot of parents, or when I speak to parents or when I'm observing, that parents want to fix the depression. And they want to, and are afraid maybe to set that expectation. And I heard you speak like, I expect, and I would love to know what you expect and how you set that boundary, because I think parents are terrified these days to actually do that maybe their kids will become completely anxious, depressed, or even have suicidal ideations. And it's been an issue. I mean, it's really mental health is really we've shined a lot of light on it, especially in the
Mhm.
past 2 years. But I think parents are afraid maybe I push too hard. But so where do you cross the line between, pushing too hard, expectations, and letting them fall forward?
Right. And I think that's an important question, because for a lot of parents, they're trying to, like, because they're so afraid of,
Mm,
like, being depressed or anxious and all these negative feelings, they end up, doing things that are not helpful. And I think if the parents will kind of like be more curious about the child's experience.
yeah.
So if, let's say, your child is, experiencing outbursts of anger or just like sadness, right? Like he's staying in bed or
Mhm.
not eating or not sleeping. And as a parent, you just want to be like, oh, get up, or, just like trying to help and fix the situation.
Right.
What you end up doing is making things worse because you are not validating the child's experience.
Hmm. Yeah, and but how do you get the kids like how do you set the expectation and have the and I guess I'm big on manners and I'm big on respect, and I think
Yeah.
that people are afraid to ask that of their kids these days.
Mhm.
So I'd love to hear you. What do you expect of your teenagers?
Right. So I feel like that's kind of a delicate line, because
Yeah.
in one hand you want to be able to attend to your child and their needs, and be like empathetic and
Mm-hmm.
kind, but on the other hand, you want to be able to set the boundaries and be assertive and just kind of let your child know what is
Yeah.
okay and what is not okay. So, like, well, if we'll take, for example, like some teenage girls, like they want to dress in a very provocative way. Some
Lord,
parents will be,
yes.
We
yeah.
saw a lot of that last week. Yeah.
Yeah. My own
Right.
kids. Come on. Yeah.
Right. So it's kind of like this delicate line. And a lot of parents are like very strict about it. And then, of course, they leave the house and
Mm,
sometimes they just change anyway.
right.
But then,
Outcomes.
yeah, I mean, some parents have more consequences. For example, one of the mom we work with, if the daughter will wear any of these tank tops, like they will literally remove all these tank tops from her closet, and just she will not have them anymore. Or, so I
Yes.
think like the consequences is really important, and being consistent with the child. And I think that what a lot of parents kind of miss is, before the problem even starts, like having a conversation with their child. And if it's about respect, for
Mm,
example, saying something like, before you even get into a place where you're calling your child's name and they're ignoring you, of course, right? Because
right.
they're on their phone,
Right.
you can have a conversation where, hey, like, when I talk to you, when I call your name, I expect you to, answer me and look at me. And then using the word choice, right? And then you can choose not to do it, but there will be consequences
Yeah.
before the incident even happens.
Happens. And
So
you
these are the
made a
rules
really
of the
good
house.
point about you saw a lot of times I operate, in, fight or flight. And so like you said,
Mhm.
watch how you're responding. That's the biggest thing that I have to work on as a parent. Because,
Yeah.
if you just set the consequence, then I see it running a little more smoothly.
Well,
Well, but you're also saying responding, but it's actually you're moving from a reactive mode to a
Yes.
responsive. That is like a really one of my most favorite tips for parents, and I can actually tell you how to do it in a very simple way. And I think,
please do.
so, and so basically, like you were saying, like you get into a place where you're like you're in a fight or flight, right? Your child does something and you like immediately
Yeah.
want to react, like, what are you doing? This is not a way to talk to me, blah, blah, right? Like you get this impulse to just say something. And if instead you would literally, first of all, count three, 3, 2, 1, like,
Mhm.
and just kind of get yourself into
Mhm.
a teeny bit of a more relaxed state.
Yes.
And then instead of just reacting, all you have to do is ask a question or be curious.
Yes.
So if, for example, you're going to your child or you're calling them to whatever, clean the dishes or take the trash out, and they're like, oh, 5 more minutes, or I'm busy, or whatever, you see that they're on the phone ignoring you,
Mm.
what would be your initial reaction if you do that? If you're calling them 5 times and they're not
Yeah.
answering you back?
So you're saying don't take the phone and run over it in the driveway?
Yeah.
No, I'm saying
Or
you're
just
like,
start
yeah, what would
yelling.
be your reaction?
Just kidding.
Right.
Not that
So
we know
most
anybody that
parents,
do either of those.
yeah, no. You're right. Most parents will start yelling, and
Mm.
sometimes it's fine, right? Sometimes you just like you don't have, the patience, and maybe you had a bad day. But if you would instead, like, first of all, like when you communicate with your child, get them to get into a habit of like looking at you in the eyes. And I think a lot of
Yes.
parents don't do it. And actually, there was a research that was saying that on average, parents communicate with their kids 6 minutes a day. And usually it's like, clean your room, do this, do this, do
Yeah.
this. So, and they're not even looking at their child. So if you want to, you're saying, I want my kid to respect me, right? You're teaching your kids certain things that are important by modeling it. Then you get into a habit of like looking at them in the eye when you're talking to them,
Mm-hmm.
and not just like screaming from the kitchen, like, I called you already 5 times, and,
Yeah.
like making it. And when you do that, that kind of forces you to really like, look at them, almost go down to their level. And
Right.
even if you see that they're on their phone, you're like, and you want to scream because they didn't listen, you can ask a question. Hey, like, I just called you, to take the trash.
Right.
Did you hear me calling you? And like,
Ah,
they might say,
good
I'm on my
question.
phone, whatever they say, instead of just like thinking about you and what you want to say, you'll be like, oh, are you on your phone? Like, oh, you're doing homework. What is it that you're looking at? Just kind of, what are you looking? What's cool on Instagram? What are you doing on TikTok? Like, I want to be,
Yeah. I mean,
I
I
want to
think
kind of,
go ahead.
So in terms of validating, when you say you spend 6 minutes
Mhm.
with your kids basically every day, what I've found talking to moms, and of course my own experience, is those 6 minutes turn into they just got home from school, and your first question is,
Mhm,
how'd you do on the math test? When are you starting
exactly.
your homework? But you're trying to get in the amount of time that they have available to you to get all the important things
Mhm.
out of the
Mhm.
way, or you feel like. And so you're missing that relationship. So what you're saying is if you
Yeah.
work on building that relationship, like what's the latest on TikTok, or asking them something that is of interest to them
Mhm.
and kind of
Mhm.
relating to, is that what you're saying? Like try to build that a little bit more, or then it's not as
Yeah.
confrontational later on when
Yeah.
to keep the
Yeah. I love that you just, like you focus on the relationship, and you brought up one of the most important words that I teach so many parents. And it's not because they're not good parents. They're not good parents. It's like nobody really knows how to validate. So the basics
Yeah.
of relationships are validation, compassion, and then another skill that I work with the teens and the parents is, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Imago dialogue. It was initially created for couple therapy, but I kind of took it, I made it super simple. And then I teach the teens how to communicate first with themselves. And then we complement the parents by teaching them how to use it with the teen. And it's so incredible to see how relationships are being repaired just with the parent or the caregiver, right? Validating the child.
Mhm.
So if we take, for example, you were saying your child came back like from school, like whatever the child is saying or doing, as a parent, all you have to do when you validate is you saying something like, it makes sense that you did blah, 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 or that you would say that or think that because.
Yes.
So if you want to
Because
give an example from your life, then we can actually use it to show how to validate.
Mhm.
I think that's one of the most important skills for parents, beside, I guess, putting themselves aside just a few seconds so that they can really attend to the child or whoever is in front of you, really.
Yeah.
You may have already answered this question in this conversation already, but I'm just curious. Whenever you have a client, so I'm a parent, I've decided my child is not performing well in school. They're
Mhm.
talking back. They say they have anxiety. I think they're depressed. I suspect, an eating disorder, whatever. If your first meeting with that child, if you ask about the relationship with the parents, what's the most common thing a child
Yeah.
says about that brought them to sitting there across from you? Is there a consistent, I don't want to say complaint, or from the kid's perspective, when they're sitting there, what do you generally, or maybe it's just varied, but totally based on the child, but I imagine there's some
Mhm.
consistent things that are bringing those children to
Yeah. Yes.
sit
Please
across from
tell
you.
us what
Yeah,
they're
so
saying
because then
about us.
then we would understand better, because they won't tell us. They might tell their friends,
Mhm.
they might tell another adult
Yeah.
like you. But I'm just curious, is there something consistently you hear that a lot of parents need to know
Great
is out
question.
there that they need
Yeah,
to
that
maybe
is
work on
such an
themselves?
such an excellent question. And I think the big word is perspective. And again, feeling invalidated. So a lot of the teens will be like, oh, I tell my mom this, and then she doesn't understand me, she doesn't get me. And again, the reason is not because, and I work with them on understanding, it's not because they're bad parents. It's like parents don't have the right skills to know how to communicate with you effectively.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like to get, and again, kids, most teenagers, they're very selfish. It's like they think about themselves, even though apparently after they turn 10, they have the capacity to be compassionate. So that's kind of like, I think it's a good fact. And a lot of parents like, oh, the kid is so selfish. I'm like, yeah, most kids are selfish, right? But, some are more than others. But, I feel like if you have a child that's less than 10, then they really, developmentally speaking, don't have the capacity to understand that there is another perspective.
Okay.
But with older kids, I think once you as a parent modeling this, okay, I hear that you don't want to do whatever. You don't want to take the trash or whatever. Like if you want to give another example, we could use a more specific one. But if as a parent, you literally figure out like you want to put yourself in the child's shoes and get into their world, into their, whatever they are experiencing in as much as you can, and ask questions like, and don't just jump into a conclusion or anything. I feel like that will give you, like more of an opening from the teen's perspective of like, oh, my mom is not like yelling at me. My mom is not judging me or criticizing me. That,
So
a good example is, and I mean, even though it's like a 15 or 16-year-old girl who's like started drinking and alcohol and weed and parties and hooking up, and her mom like very, very strict, like no drinking, nothing, just, so the kid like, ends up like lying to the mom
they're
and
rebelling.
doesn't tell. And they leave, I mean, they get into a situation where they're not safe. So I
because
think
they're
another
afraid
big
to be honest.
Right. Because if they'll be honest, they will either get punished or yelled, or it's all negative. So even if they get into situations where they're in a party and they drank too much, guess who they're not going to call, right?
Yeah, that's
so I think like,
that's true.
and I think that's the biggest tip for parents is to always kind of assume that 25% of what they tell you is not really true when it comes to drinking, alcohol, drug, whatever, like unsafe behaviors. So it's like, how do you have that conversation regarding like safety and maybe helping them, come up with some ways and questions. What are you going to do in different situations? So it's very hard to be a parent.
How do we, I know because a lot of times, especially now since COVID and everything, where we want our kids to be happy. Our kids graduated in 2020. They had no prom. They had no graduation.
Yeah.
They started out college in
mass.
Yeah, it felt like prison to them. It was hard on them.
Yeah.
But you also want to build resilience. You don't want to say, okay, now you can have whatever you want because, gee, you had a rough time there. And now you look at the rest of the world. Now living in Israel, all young people have to do national service. They all have to go into the military for a brief time, if I'm correct. And now you've got, we're seeing wars in other countries where kids their age are trying to eat or survive.
Yeah, or even fight at older.
So how do we, where's the proper line as far as building resilience in them, but not being so hard on them, saying you're so spoiled, Because if they're spoiled, we did it to them, right? They didn't spoil themselves. We made that happen.
Right.
But how do you help them be more resilient? Because I feel like a lot of American kids aren't quite. I mean, they've got started there. COVID did help do some of that. I mean, just circumstances. But what's the best way to do that and not make them feel like your children feel like you're just being hard on them or you
don't understand.
You're not fair or whatever. Life isn't fair.
Yeah. No, that's such a good point because it is true. Like this pandemic, like there are a lot of people are hurting and suffering and they never had anything like that happening. So you're right, for somebody like me who I went through wars and like, if this is like, okay, this thing happened, it will pass. So some people kind of have this, it's not the ability, it's like they've had experiences that kind of brought them to become more resilient. But I think it's still, like as a parent, when your child is experiencing a lot of very difficult feelings, you want to just, your instinct is almost like, hey, life is hard, get over it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like get tough, basically. And you're right, life is hard, right? And people that actually get it are able to be more resilient. But before you do that, if you want your child to be resilient, you need to be able to connect with them, right?
Right.
And to really like, and get them to express how they feel and process it, and also have some time, right? I mean, we literally are not even done with the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're getting so many, not just the teens, it's like they're telling us about their friends that are not getting support, who are cutting, who are burning,
Yes.
who are all these shows that they're watching, Euphoria, like, like all these shows
13
that are
Reasons
teaching them.
Why, all,
All in the
Yeah,
book.
that show.
shit, we just got the
Yeah.
side eye where like that one
Yeah.
is a doozy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, and some of the movies and shows that are, like, and all the messages that they're getting from so many, I mean, they're
Yes.
brainwashed without even knowing.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
it's, beside the pandemic, it's just really difficult. So I think, like, as a parent, like, if you are that, like safe haven almost for them to like, hey, I can come to you and I can share things with you. And whatever I say is okay. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be anxious. It's okay to, and I think as a parent, you're like, what? My kid is sad? No way, right?
Yeah. What can
we fix
what
it?
What does she want? She's sad. Yeah. The other tricky part about all of this is I feel like in the history of mankind, things change, obviously. Times change, but people generally stay the same. Although I feel like there's a bigger jump in our experiences as young people to our children's experiences as young people. I didn't walk around all day as a teenager with the idea that people could be photographing me, videotaping me, secretly recording my conversation. I mean, these kids are going through things that we didn't experience. So relating to that it's a little tough for us. So moms need to give themselves cut a little slack to themselves that we are all learning, because it's a totally different world.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of moms who are other moms in the situation, we would now like to invite in our Zoomer moms. Come on in, Zoomer moms, to meet Limor. Welcome, Zoomer moms. Let's go around and I'll introduce each one of them. We have Leslie Harrell, who is the mom of a son and a daughter. Amy Blasher, who has two daughters. One who is 9 years old, on the verge of becoming a teenager. And another person in the same situation, Helen Savage, who has a 5th grade daughter. And Jennifer Marsh, who has a son and a daughter. Welcome, Zoomer moms. Let's go around. And Amy, do you have a question for Limor?
Yeah. So I am kind of a newlywed, and we have a blended family. So my daughter, who's 9, is my biological daughter. So I was just wondering if you had any experience with blended families, and if so, what kind of struggles do the teenagers have in blended families?
Yeah, yeah, we've had a lot of, I mean, this is New York. I mean, I think more than 50 or 60% of the families are, like divorced and blended. And I think from a teenage perspective, it's like feeling like they are not as important anymore because there is somebody else in the family, especially if I don't know if your husband has his own kids or you have additional kids, or just
no, it's just my daughter.
So, yeah. And you know what, like, I think she's 9, but now 9 is like 11 or 12, especially girls are a little bit more. I mean, I would even like ask her, a question about it. I mean, I'm always amazed, even with the 8-year-old, I mean, the 8 or 9-year-old that I work with, and I ask them questions about the parents and, how do they think they feel about something. I mean, they are so insightful, and they're so smart. And a lot of them will say, oh, my parents, they don't talk about their feelings. And they will tell me, like, a lot of them too, especially the younger ones, oh, I can't talk about my feelings because then that means I'm weak. And then when we ask about the parents, they would say, oh, I mean, if the parents talk about feelings, they're like, no, I mean, most of them would say no.
Mhm.
So I guess for you, it's like finding the right time, right? You're not going to be like, by the way, asking her this, but going to a picnic or finding special time where you will
Mhm.
just have a conversation. Or sometimes what I suggest to parents is like finding a movie about blending
Mhm.
families. And
Yeah.
then you can maybe pause or afterwards ask your daughter, oh, like they also blended. Like, what did you think
Yeah.
about what the girl was saying about the other, about the dad,
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
it's not like
Mhm.
directly. I mean, the
Right.
books, I mean, there's so many different ways if you kind of want to bring it from a different angle.
Mhm.
But I would definitely talk to her about it, ask how she feels, tell her how you feel about it.
Sounds like good advice. Jennifer, do you have any questions for Limor?
I have so many questions. I have like a whole page of notes I've been taking because
Oh.
it's all resonating with, a 16-year-old boy who, they just get really quiet when they're 16 and you
Mhm.
don't want to push too hard. But at the same time, you're just dying for intel, like any intel. And at the same time,
Mhm.
they need your privacy. I'm not one of those helicopter moms, but at the same time, like you care so much and you have experience, you want to help them, but
Mhm.
and the being curious instead of judgmental is like something I've been sort of like I've been my mantra recently is just figuring out what's going on with him. But so my question for you is, how do you kind of get those sort of quiet teenage boys to open up a little?
Mhm.
Like we got a dog and that helped a bit
Mhm.
because it's his dog. But I mean, he's just sort of in a nut, right? A hard nutshell right now. I can't crack it.
Right. Yeah. And it's like, I feel like with boys, it's a little bit more challenging. But then again, they come here and they tell me all the things that they do that they will never talk to their parents about, which
Wow.
I was just
Wow.
saying, I have the luxury of like, I have a 15-year-old, like he tells me about like how he hooks up with the girls and how they try the weed. And I'm like they do all these things that they will never talk to their parents about. Right. And as
Yeah.
they get older, they experience more and more things that, like they will not share with the parent,
Right.
most of them. Some of the girls sometimes will. But so it's kind of interesting. And, I always kind of focus on safety with them because sometimes they will be like, oh, we drove to like Harlem to buy drugs, like, or, whatever. Like they would tell me that they took an Uber to,
Oh,
so I always kind of, like my focus is also like safety.
Mhm.
And I think for the parent is, again, like thinking about what you are modeling, right? So I don't know if you're in a relationship or if there is a dad, but if there is, like I would have conversations around, like something that happened and bring in like a feeling, or maybe, you can talk about an experience from your teen, just like bring up certain things and model that, talking about something, even if it's not a positive thing. But I mean, I think the other thing is really like if your son is quiet, a lot of parents just kind of like, what should I do? And
yeah.
they get really anxious about, should we go in? Should we not? And then you go in and the kid is like, close the door. Like, I'm doing whatever, right? I'm doing
Yeah.
homework and they're probably on TikTok or whatever, right?
Right.
Or they're playing games for hours and hours. Especially, this is a huge problem with the pandemic. A lot of, teens develop like social anxiety and isolation and obsession with video games, or there are so many different things happening online that the teens are being, like kind of drawn into in different ways. And it's
Mhm.
really, some of them are really like unsafe,
Yeah.
like on TikTok, you could buy anything on TikTok
Mhm.
or Instagram. And yeah, it's,
Right. And then also you always worry with boys about, obviously all the pornography out there is the thing.
Yeah.
And, I
oh,
think they all dabble, but you just, it's a hard thing to enter in that discussion. I mean, I don't.
yeah. But you know what? You are very vulnerable. But I think as a parent, again, if you find an opportunity to find just like, and really like, just say something like, hey, I get that you are busy and you have your friends and you want to do whatever you're doing, but I want to have a conversation about like safety and
Yeah.
about, and just even if you think they don't hear, like, I think if you're just saying it in a way that they can actually hear you, if you first like mirror and reflect what they're doing or what they're saying, and then you validate, you show the compassion, and then you say what you want to say,
Mhm.
then your teen will be able to kind of say, oh, like my mom's focusing on safety, but she's not like judging me or criticizing me, right?
Right.
So if you're taking as an example, yeah, you wanted to ask something, sorry.
I think that's a big issue with kids these days, like Uber and getting, especially you living in New York, right?
Yeah.
So I really have a question about how would you say to this teenage boy, I know how I say it to my girls. It's probably not the best way because you're terrified, but how do you approach asking them, do you think, not do you think that's safe, or is that safe to you? Or how do you say that to a child? Instead of being like, you
Right.
can't do that. You know what I mean? Like,
You want to take the Uber as an
yeah,
example? Like,
it's a huge
yeah.
thing. It was a huge
Yeah.
thing for my oldest daughter in high school. And I was like, heck no.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we've had like situation that, like something almost happened. But I think first you just kind of establish certain rules. And the first thing is like, you are gonna, like I want to trust you and I want you to be able to take an Uber. But before we do it, I want to make sure that you know the following, right? So first, when you go in an Uber, you look at the number, then you walk in and you ask the driver to say your name. You don't tell them your name, right? And then the third thing, when you're in the Uber, because a lot of kids will get in, if they're drunk or whatever, then, you cannot get into an Uber. They're going to get drunk, right? But at least you kind of stating that, I want to trust you and I am trusting you, right? Until you will not. But and letting them feel like you want them to be independent, but at the same time, like the world out there is not safe. So I think that's
I want to make sure we want to make sure we get to all the Zoomer moms real quick though. Does it help to share with your kids, hey, I made a terrible mistake when I was in high school and this is how I almost got run over by a car? Or should you just never share the worst things you ever did with your kids? Is that not helpful, or is that make you more relatable, or is that? We're a little short on time, and I want to get to the other two.
Yeah. This is such a great question, and it's actually we have like from my own experience. So my husband was like telling my daughter that when he was young, he got drunk and he took the car and he had an accident, without his parents knowing. So, of course, I went to Israel last month and my daughter, my 17-year-old daughter, decides to have a little party and without telling me. And of course, nothing happened that I know of. But then when I told her, she says, well, Dad said that he also had a party without telling his parents. So I guess when you share something with your kid, maybe, think about what it is that you're sharing, because then
it doesn't become
they can use it
excuse later. Yeah. Well, Leslie, do you have any questions for Limor?
Okay, I'm completely stuck on the fact that you were military. I just keep hearkening, like everything you're saying, and it's like all this relationship, relatable, like all that. And I'm like, but like being someone who came from the military, like they pretty much just say, suck it up, buttercup. This is what we need you to do. And that's a very military perspective because they can't sit there and cater to everybody's emotion. So how do you marry the fact that you come from this military and the benefits of really kind of some of that military, like, this is what we're going to do. And I don't have to explain to you 100 times why we're doing it. We're doing this because I know what I'm doing and you don't. And your psychology of like relating to people. Cause I would think that would be really hard to kind of marry those two together.
Right. Yeah. And I think if you think, it's actually interesting because I came from like the most dysfunctional home. I went to a foster family when I was 12. I was sick with anorexia, bulimia for 10 years, even in the army a little bit. And then when I got to the army when I was 18, I was still like struggling with bulimia, like depression, anxiety. But the stuck up mentality just kind of like, just say, hey, Limor, like you got to wake up in the morning at 5, you got to exercise, you got to do this and this and that. I didn't really have time to deal with my challenges. But what I've learned from that was helpful was the consistency, the boundaries, learning to be assertive, like, learning to developing self-confidence, right? That, you could, if you work really hard, achieve certain goals. And I think the whole psychology thing kind of like, like later on, I understood that you can say as a parent, you know what, these are my rules. You come home at 12 and this is it. You're not like, this is what we do in my home. We look at each other when we talk. We eat at the table. We respect whatever it is that you're saying. And these are the rules of the home. And at the same time, how you do it and how you repair something that happened is crucial, right?
Yeah.
So if, let's say, you say I have a rule, you come home at 12 and your child comes home at 12:30, you want to just like scream and yell and like you're never going to go out again, right? You could do that, but before you do it, you can first connect to the child and say something like, hey, you know what, I get that you came home at 12:30, all your friends are still out, it must be very difficult to get home at 12 when everybody else comes home at 1 a.m. But, right? So you kind of address the perspective and then you're like, but I'm just reminding you, these are the rules of the home. And using the word choice, you can choose to come late next time. But if you if you choose to come late next time, then there will be consequences, right?
Yeah.
I always think about the rules, like we set up these rules, and then I'm always like, for every rule, there's a specific consequence that I'm willing to make sure that I implement. So for me, it's always been like, you come home at 11:30, and for every, we haven't, our son's never come home early, but come home late, but like, and he's 17, so he's pretty good. But I mean, like, we were like, for every 5 minutes you're late, you're grounded 1 day. So make your choice. And so that was always kind of our parameter. We just set up our consequences, like, and told him ahead of time and be like, this is this. And so, if you make this choice, this is the consequence. There's no surprises. I'm not going to sit and yell at you. I'm going to tell you what the consequences are. And that's how we do it. I just laughed because it's like, I would just think being military and like where there's just not a lot of this touchy feely stuff in the military and coming into this, it's just kind of interesting. But anyway.
Well, I'm going to have to be military here right now and say we have very little time left. And so we definitely want to get to Helen's question. Helen, do you have a question for Limor?
Yes, I have so many questions, but my number one question is with my 10-year-old daughter, who I adore and is smart as a whip. Two things. First, is there a great website that you can recommend that has great tips for parenting? That's question number one. And question number two is my daughter is on an apology. She's obsessed with me apologizing for everything that I do that she doesn't like. So, and I've got some things I got to work out with my husband in terms of what he allows her to do when I've said no. That's, I know, obviously a problem, which I'm working on fixing, but it's just, apologize. I'm not going to speak to you. I'm not going to do what you say until you apologize to me. Blah, blah, blah.
Can you
blah,
give an
blah,
example of what you did that she wants you to follow?
She didn't like the way I asked a question. I mean, I said, would you please, turn off the computer? It's time for dinner, or come sit at the table. Don't, get on the, she talks to her friends via Messenger. She's not on TikTok or any of these other things, Instagram, Facebook, but, she wants to communicate with her friends that she doesn't see because we pulled her out of school. So, I'm not going to sit at the table. Now apologize because I don't like the way you said for me to come to the table. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So it sounds like your daughter is like kind of running things in your house, right?
I hate to admit it in front of all these people, but yes,
no, this is like for a lot of
admit
parents. This is like, I feel like, this is the first and most important thing for parents to do is to admit that nothing is wrong with you. You're just doing something that is not working.
I totally am doing lots of things that aren't working.
And I feel like this is, once you do that and you're not just like, oh, I know everything. And, like, no, you are acting in a way that is allowing your daughter to take advantage of the situation. And these little people, they know so well how to do it. I mean, they tell me this too. They're like, oh yeah. I got my mom and dad running around.
And she tells her friends that. Yeah. She talks about her friends' parents are very strict and we're not as strict as her friends' parents.
I don't know how much time we have, but the first thing I would do is like you and your husband need to set up a specific meeting and get a pen and a pencil and write down what things you are willing to accept and what you are not, right? And then you're going to, have another meeting with your daughter, like find like a nice, like, I don't know, like it doesn't have to be like a serious thing, and just say something like, Daddy and I have been thinking about like, certain things and what is acceptable in our house and what is not acceptable in our house. And you want to include her in the conversation, right? And you wanted to, and certain things are, and this happened until now, X, Y, and Z. And mommy and daddy agree that, going forward, these things are going to work in a different way, right? I wouldn't bring a lot of things. Choose like one thing that you just keep, you find yourself kind of telling over and over again.
Mhm.
And back to, I think it was Leslie that you were saying the consequences.
Mhm.
A lot of parents give consequences that are negative. I like to also bring in something positive. So instead of saying, hey, if you're going to be late 5 minutes next time, or if you're going to say this, then you're going to lose this, right? Or the consequences is usually not something they would like. I would say, how about we have a little bit of an agreement? If you come home every time, like for the next month at 11:30, then, in April or May, we will give you extra 15 minutes.
Yes.
So the
Mhm.
positive reinforcement, you want whatever you do to have more of a positive attitude. And at the same time, like these are the rules of the home.
Yeah.
And if she keeps bringing the apology thing, you want to be able to do the validation thing, right?
Mhm.
And I hear you saying that you want mommy to apologize, because you got to enter her world before you set your expectation and
I know.
what you think.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Really helpful. And I
Well,
love the positive reinforcement.
And this has
Yeah.
all been really helpful, Limor. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but it's been great having you join us. Everyone, I'm sure, has been taking
Yeah.
copious notes that are listening
Yes.
onto the podcast. Where can I know that they can find you at bespokewellnesspartners.com on your website, but where else can they find you? Do you have any social media that you'd like to share?
Either Limor Weinstein or Bespoke Wellness Partners. And you can read a lot about, so I've developed a therapeutic method that has a lot of skills that I use for parents. And there's actually a workbook that the parents are getting and the teenagers. It's like in the process of, it's going to be like some sort of if you look on the website, I use a lot of different skills from therapy and coaching and and basically when you are in therapy or when we talk to the parents, they're getting a lot of like concrete things and not just like talk therapy that can take years.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's terrific. Well, thank you so much. And we would also like to thank
Welcome.
our brand new sponsor, Catch Events. Catch Events brings style, experience, and grace, making your event an exceptional one. They specialize in events and weddings nationwide, and they have an eye for detail, refinement, and quality mixed in with a little fun and originality. You can find Catch Events on Instagram if you'd like to book them for one of your events. And you can find us on Instagram. Yeah. In Florida. We're not in Florida. On Inside the Moms Club. Maybe back in Florida. We may, when it settles down, when the parents have all listened to this and they've gotten everybody under control, we will go back.
Okay.
It'll be gone. That's a plan. Well, I'm sorry we're out of time. This has been a great show, but we'll be back next time with celebrities and extraordinary moms just like you. We know your me time is precious and valuable. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. Remember our motto here at Inside the Moms Club. If you don't laugh sometimes, what happens, Julie?
You're gonna cry.
You are gonna cry. So keep laughing, moms. Thanks for joining us on Inside the Moms Club.